This is Privacy on the Ground, where privacy meets real life.
In autumn means, our culture is our strength. In every culture definitely is that strength because it comes with the stories, the knowledge about place and identity and food.
Amy Juan sometimes tells a story about a little bean that grows on Xavier co-op farm called the Tepary bean. Juan is the admin manager of that farm in the Xavier district of the Tohono Nation, which is close to Tucson, Arizona. Through her work with IITC, the International Indian Treaty Council, an Indigenous people's human rights organization, Juan has traveled the world as a knowledge holder in food and seed sovereignty for the Southwest and desert region. Juan's professional affiliations don't necessarily entirely capture what she really does or why it matters, though. That story she tells about the tiny Tepary bean, it helps bring to life the meaning of her work and to illuminate why the knowledge embedded in that ancient, drought-resistant little bean is so valuable. Some might call that knowledge about the Tepary data. But it is so much more than scientific classifications in a seed database or rows and columns in a spreadsheet or zeros and ones in computer code. It is knowledge that has guided stewardship and caretaking of the Tepary and its seeds. Knowledge that has been passed for centuries from generation to generation among the people of the often hot, dry Tohono Nation, which traverses the southwestern U.S. and crosses the Mexico border. Knowledge about a bean that just 100 years ago grew in at least a dozen colors, but now comes in just 3. Knowledge that has become more and more precious as climate change and water and food insecurity have given the Tepary increasing financial and political implications. Juan's story of that bean and how sharing its seeds helped connect the Tohono people to Indigenous communities thousands of miles away, it speaks volumes. You'll hear her tell it in her own words later on in this episode. I'm Kate Kay, Deputy Director of World Privacy Forum. I visited Juan at San Javier Co-op Farm in April. I was in Tucson for the Indigenous Data Sovereignty and Governance Summit, a conference organized by the United States Indigenous Data Sovereignty Network. It was springtime, but already scorching hot and sunny in the Tucson area. San Javier Co-op Farm is a certified naturally grown farm, and as Juan explained, the deliberate choice to avoid herbicides or pesticides is a practice that aligns with her community's values that guide how they take care of their seeds and their food. Quite literally, those practices are Indigenous data sovereignty on the ground.
Dash Anyap Jigik Amy One, Chapkawahi Amajit Stukdak Jikshan, Tohono Nation. Yajit and Algop Jichkik Romelda McGill, Sylvester Juan, and Yakak Junior Waskop Jichkik Mary Elizabeth McGill, but Lawrence McGill, but and Yuhurchin Yakak of Chichikik, Mary Melissa Miles, but Danny One, but and you will but not God, Elijah Kristen Ross, and you Wilmacum, or you Wilmacum, and Autumn Jigik, Thalma Kathonic. Good afternoon. My name is Amy Juan. I come from the Tohono Nation from 3 communities, Tucson, Wichita, and Kamo Bobby. I just introduced my family, where I come from, who I come from, and also to share my clan. I come from the Buzzard clan, and my O'odham name is Dalmak Dalnadik, which means Milky Way Light. And so I am the current admin manager here at San Xavier Co-op Farm. San Xavier Co-op Farm has been around since the late 70s with the very interesting history. We're located in the San Xavier district of the Tohono Nation. And for those who aren't familiar with Tohono O'odham means desert people. And we have always existed here in Southwest in the desert areas close to Tucson. Actually, Tucson is, I would say, one of the biggest O'odham communities existing here along the Santa Cruz River. Tucson is actually derived from O'odham language, meaning Tucson or the Black Base. And so this is our traditional homelands, and the Tohono Nation as it exists now is about the size of the state of Connecticut. They say about 2.8 million acres. We share 75 miles of international border with Mexico and are bisected by the border. Our traditional homelands span as far south as Hermosillo, Mexico, as far north as Scottsdale, Arizona, as far west as the Sea of Cortez, and as far east as the San Pedro River. And so San Xavier District is actually the eastern most district of the Tohono Nation. We're on the eastern boundary right now. I come from several communities, where my mom comes from, where my dad comes from, and then where I was raised with my grandma. So representing different communities on what I like to call the motherland or the mainland. Because if you were to look at a map, the Tohono Nation is divided into 11 districts, and San Xavier District is just one district, kind of akin to states. U.S. makes up the country, divided into states, and then how the process goes from there is very similar.
I asked Juan how she defines food sovereignty and how it connects to the mission of the San Xavier Co-op Farm.
Yeah, so actually, personally, I like to just remind people, even our own communities, that we were already sovereign before the word even existed to us. To be sovereign is to be self-sufficient and being able to care for ourselves, and we definitely have a history of doing that, being farmers here in the Southwest or being desert farmers. However, as times change and terms change, food sovereignty is just that, or the ability to feed ourselves. To be truly sovereign, we believe that we should also, not fully depend on outside sources to keep us alive, and just to be self-sufficient and self-sustainable.
Okay, so I asked Juan, does she see connections between food sovereignty and data sovereignty?
I am beginning to. I'm beginning to. I think that is also another, another, how would I say, updated term or way of looking at methods that we've already used in the past. Yes. Yes. We've always collected data, but our data wasn't recorded on paper. It was um, observation and direct relationship between land, food, weather, stars, all of just the world around us, and being observant and taking that information for us to guide our work and to guide our planting and to guide our future. So I look at it that way. We were already collecting data, but the way that we've been sharing it has been pretty much oral through our stories. And so I look at it that way, and it makes it easier to swallow, because when we use language in our communities, because of past experiences that have been pretty traumatic, of involving like data collection in various aspects, it can be kind of scary. So I think that the term of, indigenous data sovereignty is really still kind of new. I know it's not new, but to regular community members who aren't necessarily maybe in those types of circles or in academia, it's still something new. And I always remind people, when we bring terms like this into our community, we always should be mindful that language and access and translation of those terms should apply to, it should apply for me to be, for it to be easy for me to explain this to my grandma, you know. And so when that's the first thing I think of, to kind of relate, because if we were looking to translate something into O'odham language, I would first have to explain that to an elder or to a community member. This is what they're looking for, and kind of relate it. And so I do see the connections. I do see the benefits, but also just keeping in mind that it's still a learning curve for a lot of people. So I would say that right now in my job and in the capacity that I'm in, that's definitely part of the work that I do, is being that bridge between what is a business, what is a cooperative that involves so many different layers of issues, and how that connects to the community, and to our Alatis, who are the owners of this farm, as a cooperative. Especially being here in our community, our descendancy, our lineage is so long that I think it's important for people to understand that our memory is that long. Even though I'm 38, my memory is also extended by those things I was talking about earlier, those stories, different things that we are taught. And so this community here for San Xavier District, or for WAC, WAC, W-A colon K, is the traditional name of this community. WAC means the mouth of the river. And so understanding the geography of this area and the environment is, yes, we are located right next to what is known as the Santa Cruz River, but to the O'odham is also known as the Ari Akimur, or the Baby River, that connects to other rivers heading up through our territories: Gila River, Salt River, Verde River, all of those things. So in my memory, everything's connected. And so the community of WAC, it's definitely the longest, most consistent farming community. Before the farm was established as a cooperative or as a business, the community was already farming here along the river. And so what established the farm was in the late 1800s, with the United States government Dawes Allotment Act, came in and basically turned what was already communal living and communal farming, and kind of individualized it by giving them allotments or plots of land to make assimilation into, the American culture easier, because that was the goal, was to make money, and to capitalize off your land, by being ranchers, or by being farmers. There wasn't much really done with that until I think, just that history between the late 1800s and the 60s and 70s. There was a lot that was happening, not just with the O'odham, but also just Native Americans in the U.S. in general. Boarding school era, that really big push to assimilate into society, or civilized society, which took us away from living and making a living, and also just our connection with the land, because it was emphasized that people needed to go to school or move to cities and get jobs. And so that really affected not just the physical health, but I will also say the cultural, spiritual, and mental health of our people. And one of the big blows to this community at that time was the loss of water. So in the 60s, 70s, as the city of Tucson was growing and expanding, they started to see that the water was depleting here. And so the community here sued the city of Tucson for water rights, and that was favorable to the O'odham and resulted in the Southern Arizona Water Rights Settlement Act, which allocated water to this community and other communities on the Tohono Nation CAP, or Central Arizona Project water, which is water that's diverted from the Colorado River to different systems here in the state of Arizona. And so it's a long and interesting history to how the farm got established, but the farm was officially established in 1972. The water rights settlements came in 1982, and now what we're seeing is this Xavier cooperative farm is just that it's a cooperative of landowners, or alatis, who decided to put their land together to form this business. And so currently we sell, and the mission has always been to grow and to provide to the community traditional autumn heirloom foods. And so what that looks like is tepary beans, or bao, autumn hod or squash, hoon, which specifically is 60-day autumn corn and other types of corn. And then we also do a lot of wild harvesting, which looks like choya buds or joram, mesquite beans or wehok, and just a slew of other desert goodies, as well as growing alfalfa and just livestock feed for animals. And one of the most important things is that we are a certified naturally grown farm, so we don't use herbicides or pesticides. And, that's important, not just for general health of what we know about the harms of what those things can do to us, but just in general, I think it's a value and a practice that aligns with our values when it comes to how we take care of our seeds and our food. So that's a little bit about the farm. We also do a lot of community education. I think one of the coolest things about Xavier Co-op is it's open to the public. So we do a lot of tours that range from an hour to all day. We take in volunteers who want to come and help us with our daily work. And we also do catering. So we provide our foods through that service, which is really cool. It's interesting to see who we're feeding out there and who we're reaching through our food.
I asked Juan if she might share a bit about her upbringing and what led her to digging in the soil.
I think for me, I'm 38, so my generation, I think, is really how do I say? My generation's really fortunate to be the generation to reconnect with our grandparents. And so, our grandparents are the ones who have not just the knowledge but the experience of old traditions, I guess, or what are becoming, or what have become older traditions and practices. Our parents were also that generation who were encouraged, to go to school, and who maybe grew up not being taught the language, or not growing up experiencing certain things. And so for me and my generation, missing that from our parents created that bridge for us to connect strongly with our grandparents and to learn those things. So for me, that was the case. I grew up with my grandparents. Not that my parents weren't around, but for some reason, I just always wanted to be with my grandmas. And I think it was because we were doing a lot of hands-on things. My dad's mom, she was very active in the community. So I think that's where I got my love of of community, showing up and helping and just being active. And mom's uh, my mom's mother, and I laugh because both of my grandmas were named Mary. She was the cook, and she was the one who made a lot of things from scratch and just was very disciplined in the kitchen. And so with those two things, they've definitely helped mold me throughout my life. And those experiences of going out and doing harvesting of, saguaro fruit, baidach, or prickly pear, wild spinach, a lot of those things I learned from my grandmas. And so when I saw an opportunity after high school to do this work as a job, I jumped on it and really just stuck with it. It really spoke to me because I saw the benefits of what it taught me, which was a good work ethic, but also what I saw it teach other people, especially young people, when I started to be more in a coordinator role or like creating programs. I saw that a lot of young people found their purpose in the community, because maybe they hadn't been taught that or learned that, and just kind of seeking for a sense of belonging. And so to come together as a team and to do things together on the land and for the community was really, really powerful. And I've seen this work really change a lot of people for the better, because it's not a short-term job. Growing food and planning for the future around food is definitely a long-term thing. And then if we look at the bigger picture of strengthening our food system for the whole community, it's a lifelong commitment, to see it through. So I've been involved for 10 plus years now, and to me it's very rewarding because I can see the ripples of our work from 12, 15 years ago, and see that it's still continuing. A lot of the young people who are part of our programming when I was their age, now in my early 20s, they're still involved. And so that really speaks to me that we did something right. And we achieved our goals of growing farmers, which is where we really started off at when I got involved in this work. And so, man, it's been a long road, going from learning from my family and community to working with organizations like Tohono Community Action, and learning myself how to develop programs and become a good leader, become a good teacher, become a good farmer. And then that led me into going back to school. I was looking at environmental law and things like that. I was looking at linguistics, working with the language. I really just have always wanted to help my community with the issues that we have, because I also believe through my grandma that, we have the solutions that we're looking for. And so I've always been really intentional about being involved and being a part of those solutions. And that mindset took me to working with an organization called the International Indian Treaty Council. It's a Indigenous people's human rights organization, and really taking everything that I've learned from my experience and taking that knowledge to platforms like the UN to really advocate about protecting Indigenous knowledge around food and around seeds, because that also translates to defending your right to do those things, your right to protect your seeds and to grow your seeds the way that you were taught or we were taught, but also that translating into, if we want to grow good food, we need to make sure that we have good water and good land and access to all those things. So to me, it's just all related. And being able to travel the world through that job was also just a big eye opener, to go meet and eat with other Indigenous people throughout the world, going to places like Finland, Sweden, Oaxaca, um, Palestine, Egypt, all of these places that I only dreamed about when I was a kid. And being actually able to learn, but also, I think most importantly, being reminded um, that everything that I've been taught here at home um, is in every other part of the world too. They're the same values, and that my place here at home is the right place to be. That I shouldn't be really seeking for other things outside of here, because it's just emphasized. I don't know if I'm finding the right words, but I guess in my own mind, and I guess I was just out there looking and learning, but just constantly being reminded that himdikuwatikukutuk in autumn means, our culture is our strength. In every culture definitely is that strength, because it comes with the stories, the knowledge about place and identity and food. Well, at IATC, I, got a call one day from Santa River Co-op Farm, and they were looking for short-term management, come in while we find somebody permanent. So I was like, okay, I can do that. I can do, 3 or 5 months. I came and I loved it, and it was just natural, and I applied and I got the position. So I'm here. And, once that decision was made, it made it a lot easier to also just to really root myself in this work and plan for long term, because I see it as such a powerful and sacred place to be, and just be really privileged in that way to be doing this work for my community.
If there's one theme that emerges from all the conversations in this Privacy on the Ground series on Indigenous data sovereignty, it's that the connections between theoretical Indigenous data sovereignty and governance concepts to real life contexts are not always clear. I asked Juan how she applies the values of seed and food knowledge sovereignty to the real world practice of recording, storing, and managing that information.
That's a hard question to answer, because it's not just up to me. It's up to this community. It's up to it's circles and circles of community, meaning that it's me, it's our team here, it's our farm here, it's our community here, and then it just ripples to our, my community and the nation here, and then other Indigenous people. Um, these conversations about food sovereignty and just like redefining even just our language around that. A lot of people, when we talk about seeds, they tend to call, seed places where seeds are kept, seed banks. But a lot of Indigenous people disagree with that. We don't want to put, we don't want to monetize our seeds, in different ways. I think just the respect is there in the way that we consider each other and the decisions that we make. It's definitely always been a tradition of consensus, and that's still here, even as a business. I can't make decisions on my own, and I really wouldn't want to. That's not just up for me to decide, and I think that's kind of a hard lesson for some people to understand, especially if you don't necessarily belong to a community that you're accountable to, which is the big thing, I guess you'd say, is accountability. I have a lot of people to answer to, not just in a job sense, but also in a community sense. Say I decided right now that this is how we're going to store seeds, collect seeds, all of these different things. I'm going to have to answer to somebody if they have questions, or if they have concerns, or even if they just don't like it and have to consider that or just be prepared for that. So I don't even think that way. Yeah, it's not just me, it's the whole community. And that's also been a learning curve for me too. Going from being a being in my early 20s, definitely you have that feel, you're learning and you're growing and you're going for your goals and your dreams and all of that good stuff. But there's been plenty of times when I've been told or made to put my brakes, and to reconsider things. And so that's something that I've learned in my job, and even I would say just in my role as the women here, here in this community, that I have certain responsibilities as well. Uh, but I also would say I've seen a lot of beautiful things happen through our seeds, through seed remutation. And what that looks like is reclaiming roles that maybe hadn't been around for a long time. And one of those things have been seed caretakers. And so in Autumn society, or in Autumn culture, the men are basically the leaders. And so it's their job to really initiate the planting, to prepare the fields, to do all of those different things, and to also caretake. But an important role of women was to be those seed caretakers, their seeds, their babies. And so our job was to protect them and to care for them and to prepare them for planting. And so, as simple as that might sound, that was something that's been kind of lost. And so, through recent seed rematuration, that role has come back to us. And it hasn't come easy, as things change and times change and culture kind of evolves. People, I think, tend to forget that things weren't always as they are in our generation. So we've had to kind of have some hard conversations in our communities about those things. And what I'm getting at is when seeds, come home, the big question is always, well, who is going to be responsible for them? And because that role hasn't been emphasized in a long time, a lot of that responsibility was with men. And so when women come and say, no, we're it's our responsibility to care for these seeds, it's kind of be like, it's hard to let go of a role that you've been playing for so long and allowed that transition to happen. But it has, and it's been a really good thing for us. And there's a lot of other things associated with that.
In this next segment, Juan talked about why she and others in the Tohono O'odham community are fighting to reclaim who they are by reclaiming seeds and seed knowledge. That story involves another organization in Tucson called Native Seeds Search. The nonprofit operates a seed bank, part of what it calls a two-pronged approach to conserving crop genetic resources from the southwestern U.S. and northwestern Mexico. The Native Seeds Search website describes its seed bank as a repository for seeds, guarded in a safe environment for the proverbial rainy day. The organization was co-founded in 1983 by Gary Nabhan, an agrarian activist, ethnobiologist, and nature writer. Juan mentions him here. So, just one more quick side note. I actually got a chance to tour the Native Seeds Search seed bank while I was in Tucson. There, inside frigid rooms, jars of seeds labeled with names, numbers, and QR codes are stacked atop shelves. And samples of seeds, some harvested decades ago, lie in 0-degree storage, awaiting possible regeneration. Generally speaking, there's a variety of perspectives regarding the pros and cons of what seed banks like Native Seed Search do. and whether or not they help or hinder Indigenous communities or the seeds themselves. But in this talk, rather than wade into other ideas and opinions about the organization or seed banking, we'll hear Juan share her personal experiences and perspectives on the subject.
I think what I'm skirting around is um, one of the main problem areas in our work when we talk about food and seed sovereignty is um, reclaiming what we've lost in that era that I talked about, that period between the 1920s and the 60s and 70s, the roles, the language, the practice of the relationship between us and the land. And that could look like different things. And so for me, I grew up hearing stories about how many colors of Tepary beans we used to have 100 years ago.
How many?
Oh man, I've heard about 12 at least. But in my generation, in my lifetime, I grew up eating two kinds. And then I see three now. I can touch on what we're seeing now, like very, very recently in the last couple years. But growing up, it was just two. And I never knew that. I never knew that there were other colors or types of Tepary beans until I got involved in this work. And then, there are stories that are passed down from grandparents and people older than me that have been involved in this work, and the experience of being alive at times when, for example, at times when organizations like Native Seed Search were being developed. I talked with an elder just last year who was, I think she said she was about 12 when Gary Nabhan came to her community looking for seeds. And he was a student at the U of A at the time. I think he was working on his first book as a botanist, ethnobotanist, and was very curious about how we as O'odham were surviving in the desert climate, and how we were growing the food that we eat. And so, that was part of his mission, was to go around to collect seeds from Indigenous communities and to learn. And this woman, she shared, I remember that he came into our village in a little white truck, and that he went door to door asking for seed. And O'odham are very friendly, generous people. And so she said, that when he left, that he left their community with buckets of seeds, and that he had promised the people in exchange for their seeds a copy of his book that he was working on. They never saw that book. And even now I would ask if that was a fair trade. And so now, people know his work as Native Seed Search. People see that organization as the experts in Indigenous seeds. So, here we are as the experts who, just be who we are as O'odham. And having that knowledge, it's been a lot of work on our end to reclaim those traditions, reclaim those seeds, and to just actually have to fight for who we are and take back all those things that had either been lost or taken from our grandparents, our great grandparents. And so that's my generation now. So I feel very passionate about it, to basically right wrongs. And there's a lot of wrongs to right in Native history. But I think tangibly, seeds and food is like a very powerful, physical example of how we're reclaiming who we are. And it's been so cool. It's very intense, but I would share, with that history, that when I joined Tohono Community Action, they had already been in conversations with Native Seed Search about returning seed back to the nation, back to the O'odham. And we're met with some resistance, and have a history, more than 15 years of, correspondence and meetings and conversations with this organization, but didn't really get anywhere. I think the turning point in that was the pandemic. We hit a place in our history where it was not just an ask, it was a necessity, for what we thought, because we didn't know at the time what was going to happen, in a pandemic. It was on our survival. That was when the big question came was, yes, we're farming and we're farmers, but do we have food sovereignty? Do we have the ability to feed our own people when something like this happens? And the simple answer was no. So how do we get there? And yes, it's growing more seed, but also thinking about those seeds that have been in freezers for 30 plus years and knowing that they're still alive. There's still some vitality there. A lot of times they're treated like museums, like this collection of seeds, but they're still very much alive. And all of those seeds have families and communities that they came from. And so our thoughts are that, we need to bring these seeds home, and they also need to be reacclimated to the environment and the climate that we're in now, because it wasn't the same 30 plus years ago. And that they're just like us. They also need to learn how to evolve and how to acclimate to a changing environment. And then also, just more importantly, that, we just have access to those seeds so we can regrow them, so we can grow them the way that we were taught, and that these seeds are raised with the same values as us. Because there are ceremonies, there are songs that go along with these seeds. And so it's important that we, didn't forget about them. And so it wasn't until very recently that a collection of seeds, rather than what's given out, or allowed to be given out for free, but to, basically give us a collection that we can grow out and redistribute and take back to the communities and the people that they came from. And so this happened in 2020, and now we're in 2024, and this is actually going to be the third summer that we're growing out these seeds, and it's been very rewarding, beautiful work. And it's also not something that is a campaign or something that we've shared publicly. It just is because for a long time we were told that our seeds couldn't come home because there was no guarantee that we were going to take care of them or that they were going to grow for us. And so it was very inconsiderate of actually who we are, and that these are our seeds, and that even though we are not our grandparents, that knowledge has been passed on, but not a lot of people understand that or get to experience that. So once they came into our care, what I'm saying is I like to think that we've shown people outside of our community that we're here and we're ready. We're not in the same place we were 40, 30 years ago. We have farmers, we have land, we're educated, not just as farmers, but also, in human rights or in law or in nutrition or in all these different areas that apply. And we're like, no, yeah, it's time. We're ready to reclaim, who we are. And this is just one aspect of it, is through our food.
Not surprisingly, when Juan talks about seeds, she's bound to talk about tepary beans and tepary seeds.
Yeah, I love tepary beans. And I think compared to other beans, if you were to put a tepary bean up to a garbanzo or a pinto or a kidney bean, it's definitely smaller. And so visually, I think people would think there's nothing special about this bean. It's small, like a more oblong shape. So looking at it, people would think there's nothing too special about it. And I think this is why I think of it as like just a humble super bean, because it's unassuming. But tepary beans are very drought tolerant. They grow with very little water. actually the little water they get, they kind of stress themselves out to produce more. And so there is a method of encouraging that, but also taking care of it to make sure that it's healthy. And the bean itself is low on the glycemic index, and so helps regulate your blood sugar. Very, very high in protein, very, very high in a lot of other nutrients like iron, vitamin K, and so on and so forth. And so I think it was kind of under the radar for a long time. But now that, universities and people are looking at foods and methods of growing food that use very little water or that are adaptable to a changing climate or to a hotter climate, the direct answer is beans like Tepary beans. And so they're kind of a hot topic right now, which I'm kind of, it's like a lifelong friend that you can see, is kind of under the radar for a while. Then now you see all the attention on it and you're like proud of it at the same time. Like, oh, finally somebody sees your value, right? But at the same time wanting to be very protective of it. And so we see that here. And us having the stories and songs and things that are connected to it, it does hurt a little when we see it being used or being grown, with practices that are different from how we were taught, I guess you would say. And then I would say there's no right or wrong. Tepary beans are going to grow, but in order to keep the integrity of its DNA, we believe there are certain things that it should have that it can be able to pass along to its descendants, because this is also a very ancient bean that has gotten to where it's at because of its relationship with its people, with us. The risks are kind of the known, but most of all the unknown. And I say that because in Native American history in general, Western science hasn't been too friendly to Native peoples. And, we have very real, past and current examples of how data collecting has been very extractive and very harmful to our communities. And it has always been without free, prior, and informed consent. A bean, even though it's a bean, a seed, a food, we still see it as having a spirit and having a sacredness. So just the easiest example I could give right now is when we talk about genetic testing, when we talk about GMOs, or who knows what people want to do with these beans. Researchers have their own ideas, whatever, so that's unknown. Even them wanting to find out what makes this bean so special, I think the question for us is, well, why do you have to cut it open? Why do you have to dig that deep when you can ask us, when you can involve us, or even ask if we want to be involved? But there's that knowledge and process, and I'm being very vague because there's also some things that I'm not going to share with you. But without saying that, there's a relationship, and it's a responsibility to maintain that relationship just like you would with a human. And so for us, that's what we feel. And if people aren't aware, I guess just here in Arizona too, there's an example of a case involving Arizona State University that took blood samples from the Wallapai people and doing other things without their consent. And so that still very much has a ripple effect. And so now when people talk about doing research in our communities, there's a process, there's a IRB process. And, those questions are asked, when, where, why, and do we have access to your data, and how is it benefiting us? Or is there a benefit? Or can we use this somehow? I've had conversations about genetic testing on our foods with community members. And I think just that language aspect, when people hear testing, when people hear data, it just kind of triggers people. And so I think if if there's a way that we can basically, yeah, which that way is here now. You're here for an Indigenous Data Sovereignty conference. Those ways are happening. But I think when we talk about food, integrating that language um, to make those ideas more open to the community, like that's some work we need to do. We've had conversations about just even testing our seeds for their nutritional value. We wouldn't be the first ones to do that. But in thinking about how we can do that differently, we have a tribal college, Tohono Community College, for students that want to go into science or any kind of food work. Is that something that they could do? And once that work is done, where's that data going to be stored? Who's going to be responsible for it? How are we going to have access to it? Important questions, for the community to answer. But for those who have the knowledge or who are going to be doing that work, yeah, there's a lot of community education that needs to happen in order to have the community's blessing. And I think once that happens, it just opens the door for so many other possibilities as far as the community reclaiming and taking ownership of the data that comes from us.
Juan was invited to speak about food and seed sovereignty at COP27, the conference of the parties of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. It was held in 2022 in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. It was there she realized that the tiny Tepary bean could have an even greater impact than she knew.
2 years ago, I'm here at the farm full time, but I also still consult with the International Indian Treaty Council. And so because of my line of work, I'm considered a knowledge holder when it comes to food and seed sovereignty climate work, and specifically for the Southwest or for the desert region. And so I went to COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, and my role there was to talk about these topics. I sat on a panel on food sovereignty and seed sovereignty at a session there at COP27. And, this is a big room of probably about 200 plus people on a panel of about 5 people from different parts of the world. And I was the first speaker, and I was speaking about Tepary beans and the same conversation we're having today. And, I finished my talk and I passed the mic to the gentleman next to me. I'm thinking my talk's done. Okay, here we go. And, ready to listen to what he has to say. But once he got the mic, he turned directly to me and, just looked me in the eye and said, I really want to thank your people for your beans. And I just was like, what do you mean? And he shared with me and the audience. And it was a very intimate moment. Like, we're sitting in front of a lot of people, but in that moment, it was just like a conversation between us. He said that in 2004, they had a friend from the Navajo Nation who came out to their village, to their community, Namibia, Africa, and gifted them seeds. And Tepary beans were part of those seeds. And he told them that they came from us, from the autumn, from the desert, encouraged him to try them because the climate, the environment was very similar. And so it literally started off with just a handful of beans. And, he just really emphasized how special the beans are and were to them, that they grew very well, that they were very nourishing to their community and to their cattle. The chaff from the beans was fed to the cattle. It's very high in nitrogen. It's also a really good cover crop because it feeds nitrogen into the soil. So just all kinds of super cool things about it. And was just raving about this humble little bean. And I'm just sitting there crying because this is the last thing I thought I would hear, coming to a different part of the world. And those three worlds meeting. We're in Sharm el Sheikh. This guy's from Africa, and I'm from the Tohono nation, and it was just a really, how would you say, like a really special moment where it's like, okay, we're meant to be in this place having this conversation because coming out of the the depths of the pandemic and seeing our human instincts come out. People are hoarding food. People are kind of treating each other with fear. Is what a lot of what I saw. And food is something that we all need to survive. And so for us to have that very natural and very pure moment to remind people that outside of the money and outside of the politics of being at a meeting like COP27, that the simple human act of sharing seed and sharing food, we can help each other simply by just that human act of sharing. And I just thought it was so profound. It's just something very simple, but I think in that moment, people needed to be reminded of that. And it's just a reminder that needs to ripple still. And that's why I love telling that story, because even for me, it's just a reminder. And again, it's a value that I've carried from my grandparents. They would constantly drill things into you. And even though you heard it before, or you act like, why are you telling me this? You told this to me before. Now I understand the value of that. Sometimes we forget, even though we know it's a practice, And so I was so excited to come home and to come back to the farm and to tell the crew here that story, because being a farmer is also very hard work. We're getting into the summer months here. It's going to get hotter. And these guys are out there. It's actually our busiest time of the year is the summer. So whenever summer comes around, a lot of people go inside, go into air conditioning. But it's our time to be outside. And it's also our way of acclimating ourselves to our environment. We're desert people. So we do need to make sure that we're not spoiling ourselves. And that's what it comes down to, is kind of not spoiling our seeds, that they also need to be tough, and they need to come along with us into the future. And that can mean going through the good, bad, and ugly, And so coming back home and sharing that story with the crew, I was like, our hard work, your hard work, has so many ripples that we don't even know about, But now we know this story, and we can see that it's one powerful act, and how far our beans have traveled, how far our story and this bean's story and this bean's abilities have traveled. And so it really brought everything around home and just gave us a greater sense of purpose, even though that purpose was already very strong here at the farm. Our mission to keep these seeds alive and keep them thriving. It just, it's just good to have those things and apply that to our work here. And it really helps to extend the possibilities of what we're able to do here at the farm, whether it's here or in other parts of the world. So we're very proud of what we do. We can also look, outside and around the farm, and, there's the mountains and there's the mission church here that have been around for a very long time. And when we look back at pictures of the farm, we see our ancestors, we see black and white pictures, and we see those people, and they were working out in the same fields, and we can look at the same scenery and just see that the people have changed. All these generations have gone through this farm and have done this work, and now here we are in 2024. But, we're continuing the work. And again, so many more possibilities and a big vision for the future, not just for Xavier District and Xavier Co-op Farm, Tohono Nation and the world. And this is our little part that we're playing.
I'd like to thank Amy Juan for her generosity in sharing her time and personal story in a way that helps us understand what Indigenous data sovereignty means in real life on and deep inside the ground. My name is Kate Kay. Thanks so much for listening. If you'd like to learn more about World Privacy Forum and our work in data privacy in relation to healthcare, biometrics and identity, AI, and more, please visit worldprivacyforum.org.